With an overview of the agenda as a whole. We moved to economic development. Last week we did a deep dive in food and nutrition security. And today we are here with our last pillar, environmental sustainability webinar. Before we get into it, just remember to please stay on mute. Use the chat to introduce yourself right now. We'll be doing a lot of talking, but please use the chat as a living space to share questions, comments, +1. Also, the react emoji, as you all know, when we're talking on Zoom, it can be hard to keep track of the chat if you're talking. So feel free to respond to the panelists with the react emojis. If you need captions, you can click show captions. There also should be a translated audio option available. If you need support with that, you might have to update Zoom and log back on to be able to see it. And any LAFPC staff, tech-wise, Sonia or the info email can help through the chat. And if things aren't showing up, if you click the more dot, it should show up. So yeah, that's just our quick tech overview. We get into it. My name is Deja Thomas. I'm manager of strategic partnerships here at LA Food Policy Council. And our mission is dedicated to ensuring food is healthy, affordable, sustainable, fair, and accessible for all LA residents. A major part of how we track our accomplishments of that is through the Good Food for All agenda, which provides a roadmap for building an equitable, sustainable, and resilient food system in Los Angeles. A huge part of that, obviously, is environmental sustainability. And so today, I'll be going over like a quick overview, if you have not read the agenda yet, of what the environmental sustainability pillar entails. And you'll hear from some of our amazing partners around the work that they are doing to move some of these agenda items forward, because it will take all of us to achieve the 100+ items in the agenda. So I'm going to kind of get started into it to make sure we all are coming from the same starting point, which is to give a little bit of background for the work itself. So food insecurity and nutrition insecurity in LA region is quite high, with about a quarter of households in LA facing food insecurity and 21% of households facing nutrition insecurity. And for those maybe unfamiliar with that distinction, it's availability, accessibility of food compared to the availability and accessibility of nutritious food. And so we know that there can be a difference there. And so when we think about environmental sustainability, one of the main things that we're really focused on is really understanding that a coordinated urban and rural strategy are essential, because land use and farming trends that happen at the very beginning of the food chain, food cycle, shape the rest of this work and how it all circles in on each other. And so we're thinking about sustainability and environmental sustainability from the very beginning all the way through to the very end. And so to that end, we know at the land use side of things, agricultural land has increased over the last few years, but the number of farms have decreased, which does lend itself to thinking about the ways in which consolidation has maybe happened in the agricultural field. We also know 2025 was an unfortunate example of this, of the risk of food access disruptions during emergencies, with 1 in 8 Californians now living in high-risk wildfire zones, which translates to food disruptions both on the agricultural side of things, but also for folks to actually be able to access said food. And then we also, at a statewide level, have implementation of policies like SB 1383, which, for those who don't know, we just talked about some of the land and agricultural practices and how folks are getting it. But then also on the back end, when we think about how food is getting wasted, and either food that could go to folks who are food and nutrition insecure, that I mentioned at the top, or food that is going to landfills that could be composted and utilized in agricultural practices. So SB 1383 is a statewide bill that's aimed at addressing both of those things by requiring organic waste recycling for residential and businesses to meet a target, and also requiring edible food recovery from businesses and venues and large institutions to meet a target, so that food does not end up in the landfill. Edible, recoverable food ends up in the folks who need it, who are food insecure, food nutrition insecure, and non-recoverable food ends up with composting and then can get put back into our overall food chain, food system. And the city of LA is currently undergoing its first round of compliance and enforcement to see exactly how this is being played out. So we still are waiting to hear from that, but we know we'll hear from some of the folks today about some of those changes and how it's already shifting us towards more sustainability. And then as a whole, for our priority populations as a collective, are these here. There are some orgs that are really focused on one. There are some orgs that touch all of them. But between all of us and the folks on this call, we do reach all of these folks. And then I'm going to shift now to just talking about the agenda itself and the items there. For those who have not heard it the 3 weeks prior, this agenda was with feedback from 3 in-person convenings, key informant interviews, working group members, and survey responses to form what these agenda items and recommendations are. And for the environmental sustainability pillar, the core purpose of this pillar is thinking about protecting natural resources, supporting climate resilience, and promoting regenerative and sustainable food practices. And all of the items fall under 6 particular themes, which I'll go into in detail on the next few slides. This pillar has the most amount of recommendations, and so I'm not going to be able to go into detail of every single one. So I highly encourage you to read the agenda, download it, reference it for the next 10 years, because this agenda is all things in this agenda we feel like will take us 5 to 10 years to accomplish together. And so the first one is around strengthening climate resilience in the food system. And so a lot of this has to do with collaboration and coordination amongst partners to ensure that we have plans and contingency plans and emergency plans for vulnerable populations in light of climate emergencies, for the food retail side, for urban growers, and also at the community level. If things happen, how are folks able to access food in light of major emergencies and climate events? The second theme is building a circular food economy through food waste prevention, recovery, and composting. This theme has a lot, so I've split it into 2 sides. The first is really around funding distributed composting sites throughout our communities, and also investing in infrastructure for that to actually happen well, and supporting existing programming and technical assistance for community and for businesses to actually get informed and engage. Again, these programs already exist, but how do we support them and help them to scale? And then on the policy side of things, to really support that, how are we creating joint use policies so that some of that infrastructure can be co-located with other sites, developing real-time citywide food inventory, requiring zero waste plans, standardizing food pathways, engaging with our waste haulers, and really engaging with standardized compensation models for food recovery, so that it doesn't become something that is extractive and leads to other problems for the food workers involved. And so these are all policies that kind of set the stage for the programs and the funding to be used to the ability that folks have identified. The next few items are really going to speak to urban ag, because land use and urban agriculture at the very beginning of this sets the stage for a lot of sustainability in our local food system. And so the third theme is expanding access to land and water for urban ag. Now, there are a bunch of policy and regulatory items that we could update here. I'm not going to go into every single one of them in depth, but overall, protecting the existing urban agricultural land that we have, requiring the city to really think about how we're accessing these processes, leveraging school-owned land, expanding eligibility for tax incentives and other items that can really support the use of land access in urban ag. And then obviously the big piece of all of this is funding. We live in LA, land is not cheap. And so how do we establish land trusts and easements that help to make this land more affordable, and also invest in community like green spaces in under-resourced neighborhoods, and targeting and really focusing our funding there. And then the fourth piece of this is urban agricultural workforce, and how do we strengthen that? And so we can grow this urban ag that's super sustainable, but if we don't have workers who have access to dignified work and are able to move for it, it decreases the sustainability and efficiency of the farm itself. But also we want to create sustainability that also contributes to our other pillars like economic development. And so creating funding for that, expanding the existing programs for urban ag workforce development, particularly thinking about our underrepresented Angelenos, Black, Latino, Asian American women farmers in particular, really thinking about community sovereignty, which is folks' ability to make their own choices around their food system. And how do we, and as a whole, I think this will really be accomplished with collaboration and coordination with colleges, workforce development boards, and vocational programs, because these things exist, but how do we coordinate them to make them clear for folks trying to enter these workforces? And then the fifth one, which is a large one, which is around expanding funding and capital. So again, this feeds into some of the land access, this feeds into the ability for workforce development, and also the ability for the farms to engage in with composting and with climate resilience around funding, federal subsidies, investing in co-ops, collection, and food hubs that support community ownership of urban agriculture, and again, continued coordination amongst the overall supply chain from co-ops, collectives, and food hubs and farmers to encourage this work and to pool funding where possible. And then the sixth and final component is improving coordination and resource sharing across urban ag organizations. So part of this, folks really wanted to see an office of urban agriculture. This is listed in funding because the primary barrier to that is funding for said staff. With dedicated staff, funding, and programs to coordinate citywide efforts. A lot of other cities actually have this position and this office funded through their city. And then also just overall collaboration, facilitating resource sharing, stuff that you can see through our Cultivating Farmers program, and so a lot of our partners similar programs. So I just shared with you a lot. Again, if you want to get way more detail and information about all of those pieces, please, I encourage you to read the agenda, to reference it for the next 5 to 10 years as we move forward. This implementation plan, for our end, we're committed to checking in on these items in a more structured manner at the 5 and 10 year mark, but using our working groups, using our coalitions, using our coordination spaces to continue to move this work forward and support capacity building. But I think the super important part about all of this is how you can get involved. We at LAFPC, we have Food Recovery Alliance, we have a Food Waste Prevention Working Group, we have an Urban Ag Working Group, we have Cultivating Farmers and Farms programming that you can get engaged with. We also have our partners, LA Compost, they're going to share more about their work. We have Supporting Cultural Roots Nursery and other urban ag in the area. And then, of course, if any of you are parents and at LAFD, there's ways you can get engaged with that work there. And so I'm going to use this as a moment to transition to that, because the collective impact that we're all achieving, that we're hoped to achieve to get all those, is going to require much more than LAFPC. There are some things, like I mentioned, our programs that we're leading, but there's a lot of things that we are cheerleaders for and supporters of. And these 3 panelists today are kind of like, are showcasing that in a really beautiful way across how we all collectively have to work together. And so I hope you see yourself in their work. So I'm going to just go ahead and introduce them. So we have Lee Schmidt, who is a food system advisor for the LA and Ventura County at UCANR, and also founder of Cultural Roots Nursery. UCANR cultivates thriving communities, sustainable agriculture, and resilient ecosystems and economic prosperity through the development and sharing of equitable, collaborative, science-based solutions. Ryan Jackson is the executive director from LA Compost. They recycle food scraps into healthy soils for the betterment of the environment, our neighborhoods, and the food system. They cooperatively with a diverse network of partners. They co-create spaces for local composting access and engagement, and community empowerment. And then Florence Simpson, Deputy Director of Food Services at LAUSD. Obviously, LAUSD as a whole is realizing excellence for students by providing unique, rigorous, culturally relevant education that each and every student deserves. And a huge part of that is how they're getting educated and understanding their food system, sustainability, and their role in it. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen so we can hear from some of our lovely panelists. I'm going to kick it off with really talking with you, Lee. Talking about environmental sustainability and food system is like a big undertaking. I just mentioned literally everything from the farm to composting and everything in between. Which is for that reason, it's the lengthiest section of our agenda. I wanted to just start by zooming out and thinking about climate resilience for our food shed. So in your role with UCNR, how are you preparing our food shed for climate resilience?
Yeah, thank you. And hello, everybody. I'm super excited to be here today. So my name is Lee again. I am a food systems advisor covering Ventura County and LA County. And it's a relatively new position for me, but along with that role, like for the past 6 years, I've been a small grower, an urban grower. I have a plant nursery that produces Asian heritage plants with a focus on like increasing the availability of culturally relevant foods for the Asian diaspora. And so when I think about climate resilience, I kind of like am combining those two perspectives of like how can we support regenerative agriculture? Um, and regenerative agriculture, as most of us probably know, is about creating a closed loop cycle within a farm's ecosystem, focusing on building healthy soil, improving biodiversity, and recycling those nutrients and resources from the farm. And so when I'm thinking about the food system, like in my new role, which, I only started 8 months ago, so I'm still pretty new, and kind of developing like my research there. But I think about the farms as the foundation for our food system and food producers. And so when you're looking at the food chain of like how do our farms getting food to distributors like food hubs to processors for, food waste or value added products, and kind of just like the overall business sustainability of farms. To me, it's about how are we building in both like consistent market channels for the things that people are producing, but also like increasing access on the other side. So I do want to shout out to LA Compost because I think they're a great example of regenerative agriculture and like being able to recycle these like nutrients that are available in our local ecosystem and like being able to put them back into the soil. So yeah, marketing is kind of one side of it, but then on the other side, like on the actual farms and gardens, I really think a lot about how do we prepare the plants that we cultivate to a changing climate and like specifically to drier conditions. And I do think that the small and regenerative farms and urban farms are like leading the way with this through seed saving and having like a greater biodiversity like within their farms, whether it's like through the varieties they produce or just even, being able to plant like native plants on their farms and like supporting pollinators. So I think with seed saving and seed breeding, this is happening all over the world. And I just wanted to share like a story about last fall, I had the chance to visit small scale farmers in Taiwan who were experiencing like changing rainfall patterns. They got like double the amount of rain as usual, but because they had planted this heirloom variety that was already adapted to a wet climate, over a really long amount of time, they were still able to get a crop. And I think that's like an important example of how if we're not thinking about climate adaptation and like really adapting like the varieties that we're growing and increasing like that biodiversity, we're going to be more vulnerable ultimately to changing climate. And so I think also what I love about seed saving is that it is something that everyone can do, like even in your garden. And within the span of 1 year, we can adapt our seeds to the climate conditions of that year. So I have some seeds that I've been growing for the past 5 or 6 years. And, when I'm in that process of like having that relationship with that crop, I'm seeing like which plants are doing better, which are doing worse. And I try to save seeds from the plants that are like producing the most. And so really having that like consciousness and like education building and support to land stewards who are like there and like watching those conditions on a daily basis, I think is really important. And yeah, I'll end it with there.
Thank you so much. And I love the idea that like particularly with seed saving and thinking about like the the plants that are actively responding well to changing climate conditions and the ways that like even if you have a small garden, you can actually contribute and participate in that, small or large. And so I'm kind of going to shift backward to kind of the full other circle of the food system, thinking about composting. And so a huge area, y'all saw that those two slides, is building a circular food economy via food waste prevention, recovery, and composting. And so Ryan, can you speak a little bit more of how LA Compost is making compost more accessible to Angelenos, and in turn, completing that loop to support urban agriculture in Los Angeles?
Yes, happy to. Thanks for the question. Again, I'm Ryan Jackson with LA Compost. And at LA Compost, our mission is to restore lost connections between soil and people. And we know a lot of our neighbors across LA County have never even heard of composting. A lot of communities across the county really aren't sure how to take climate action. And in general, people find it difficult to be part of a healthy food system. And so our goal is to change all that. And we think that by increasing compost access, we can do it. We believe that every Angeleno should have an opportunity to learn about composting in their very own neighborhood, alongside their neighbors, where all of the benefits of their efforts stay local. So if we're applying compost locally and they're able to grow more food, it should then feed neighborhood families as well. And this model has been growing kind of slow and steady. We started under our founder, Michael Martinez, back in 2013. And at the time, it was Michael and a couple of friends with bikes and bike trailers going around to juicers to get their food scraps in San Gabriel Valley. And we kind of really blossomed. So Tanya, if you're able to share the link to our partner map, I'd like to show everyone. We're now expanded to over 50 sites throughout LA County. And the movement's taking root, and we're pleased to be welcomed in so many different types of spaces. The partners are incredible. We have really strong city partners. We're partnered with park systems, schools, community gardens, churches, tribes, you name it. It's all that collective action by everybody countywide that's helping us to really increase accessibility and expand our reach. And so if you're able to see the key for this map, I'll give you a little bit of glimpse about how we do this work. Our typical participant is setting aside their food scraps during meal prep, and then they bring those over to one of our farmers market locations. We have a booth at farmers markets all across the county, and then we process those very nearby. So at 25 farmers markets each and every week, our LA Compost team is there, and we take those over to 25 adjacent processing sites. And how this relates back to urban ag and kind of helps to close that cycle that Deja was highlighting is that we're processing at these co-locations, farms, community gardens, school gardens, and all of that finished compost can be applied directly. So when you're applying that compost to soil, you're increasing soil health. When you have healthy soils, you're able to retain more water within those soils. When you have healthy soils, you're able to produce more nutrient-dense foods, and you also don't have to pay for expensive chemical fertilizers. So there's a lot of direct benefit to co-locating, and that's why we have so many strong partners that are also growing food. And we just find that it's mutually beneficial. Everywhere that we seek to grow food, we should also be composting. And the Good Food for All agenda is just super ambitious in how much they think we can achieve in terms of the number of sites. And that's what we need to see. We need to see a lot more gardens, a lot more farms, and a lot more community compost sites so that our neighbors can actually restore those connections and feel like they have a stake in the health of our soil and the health of our food system.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And yeah, and the map is great if folks want to take a look. You more than likely live next to one of these markets, so definitely set stuff aside. And I can attest to the power of the compost even on my houseplants. I also want to shift gears a little bit and to think about, we have kind of things happening in the urban ag space, things happening in the compost to help kind of really close that loop. And then there's also a number of statewide and local sustainability bills and initiatives with the intent of making that loop like enforceable across the food chain. And so really thinking about institutions and the idea that these large institutions making these changes literally metaphorically raises the floor for sustainability for the region as a whole, but also allows for rapidly scaled impact. And so Florence, can you share a little bit about how LAUSD, one of the second largest school districts in the country, is really approaching implementing things like SB 1383, which I share that focus on increasing organics recycling and food recovery on campuses to address food waste prevention, recovery, and composting?
It's still muted. Yeah, absolutely. And it's kind of one of those double-edged swords, right? You want large institutions to do it because you want the largest impact, but it's also probably the hardest for the largest institutions to do it, right? Sometimes it's easier to start things on a smaller level. So for us, we're focusing right now really on the waste reduction and food recovery part. And part of that starts with educating the students, right? That food has equity, food has value. Don't take something that if you're not going to eat it, and then implementing share carts. But one of the ways that we make things happen in the district is we have to start small and figure out working models that we can then scale. So one of the things that's been very instrumental in this is I see a couple of our partners on here with John from Crop Swap and Rachel from Garden School Foundation. We have a group of pilot schools where, especially Garden School Foundation, is going in. They have a garden coordinator. They help with the education to the students. We have liquid milk collectors. We have the waste separation going on. And then they've helped us implement shared tables where the students, if they don't want the food, they can put it on this shared cart. And this nice little cart with all this beautiful signage on it. Then other students can partake in that. Or at the end of the school day, if they have leftovers, they take it out and any parents coming to pick up their students can have that as well. So they've helped us develop this model, and now we're going to be scaling that model with the share carts across the district. So it's those partners and foundations that really help us. LA Compost, thank you, is working with us at Dorsey High School. They're working directly with John. We all know it's easy to have elementary kids go through a line, separate their food, pour out their milk, and they understand it well. But when you're talking about a middle school, high school campus spread over a large area with 2,000 to 3,000 students, it's a little bit harder to get that communication and that message across. So in those schools, we're working directly with student groups to help with peer-to-peer messaging. And then LA Compost is really helping us out. They've worked with John to get the composting program going there. So it's forums like this really that help you connect to people that can help you show sustainable models, and then sharing information as well. I know I shared it with Deja. I'm so excited to be going to UCLA and seeing some of their systems as another large institution trying to implement things in 1383.
Thank you. And yeah, and then for the share cart, we'll share in the chat a little bit more about some of the share carts. And there's a video that we can share at the end of the webinar so folks can see some of the stuff in action, because, I think long-term sustainability, having students learn this stuff in school, that will carry out to them into their adulthood. And so we'll continue to see those behavior shifts long term. And so now we kind of talked about the full kind of cycle of, I think, the food system and the way that sustainability and has showed up in the agenda as it relates to it. I do want to shift back into agriculture and really think about, I think LA historically has been an agricultural powerhouse that has faded, but I think we can all agree, with particularly the folks on this call, there is a large movement of farmers bringing this work back with a focus particularly on low-income communities, Black and brown farmers, and community members really feeding themselves and their community. And so I want to kind of go back to Lee and really think about, kind of based on your experience, both as a food systems advisor with UCANR, but also as a farmer yourself, like, what are some of the land access and water access strategies that you're looking forward to pursuing across the region?
Yeah, well, as I mentioned in my previous response in talking about like seed resilience and biodiversity, I think we also really need to support the people who are stewarding our food supply. And specifically, I think with land access, how do we increase land access and long-term land tenure for BIPOC and beginning farmers who are stewarding like these biodiverse crops. And so I wanted to share a link, or maybe Tony can share the link from the California Agriculture Land Equity Task Force final report, which some of you may have heard of, but is the result of 2 years of work by a group of really amazing people to try to understand how we can make land access more equitable, like in California. And so there are a lot of actionable steps outlined in that report that I feel like could be a good complement to the LA Food Policy Council's report of just like um, how can we actually take steps towards land equity. And so, like, for example, the number one recommendation in that report is to prioritize tribal stewardship and land return. Number two is funding and incentivizing land acquisition for priority producers and tribal land stewards. So I think there's a lot of creative ways that we could think about this collectively. Like, I don't think it necessarily needs to mean like, each farmer out there needs to like buy land and then start their farm, but like, how can we actually think about this like more collectively? Um, and I think especially like in thinking about, the average age of the farmer is like 70 years old. 70% of farmers need another job just to support what they're doing. I think the more that we can kind of come together and create collective systems, the more we are going to be able to support people to be producers. And I think along with that too, there's like this education piece of like beginning farmers, like where are they supposed to, where are people supposed to learn how to farm? Like I didn't grow up in a farming family. I kind of like took an alternative route and ended up kind of like pursuing jobs on like organic farms, and I learned that way, learning by doing, but also at the same time, like I wasn't able to learn about any of the crops that like I find important in my life or the crops that are important for my community. So I think the more we can support a wide range of people, like no matter what their experience into agriculture, that is going to help us with like sustainability in the long run. And like with the land tenure piece, as a small urban farmer, um, there's like a very real barrier to accessing resources when you don't have long-term tenure. So like as a greenhouse grower, there are like programs out there that I could apply to, get funding for infrastructure, but because I don't have a 5 to 10 year lease somewhere, I'm not eligible for that funding. So if we can have places that are like, okay, this is somewhere where we can have this longer term tenure and have growers there that then they can actually like make the investments to make their businesses and organizations more sustainable. And then I also just wanted to share one other organization that I've been a part of for the past 5 years called the California Farmer Justice Collaborative. And so this group is working throughout the state to support farmers of color. So they have a microgrant program. So if there are any growers out there on the call, keep your eye out for that because over the past several years, I think we've supported like 200K in microgrants for farmers to get infrastructure and any things that they need to get started. And then they're also organizing an event called the Rural Justice Summit, which is focused on building relationships and connections between rural and urban farmers of color. And so, I think uh, I would say it's very important, like Ryan mentioned, to have sites of food production within the cities and to have those be very visible. And it's also important for us to think about how can we access larger pieces of land and like create support systems around them so that we can actually like make some changes long term with our food system.
Thank you so much for sharing it. I think there's a lot of really important gems in there, particularly around like the land access piece and like the barrier that exists in that not accessing, having access to long-term land tenure then creates a ripple effect that prohibits any other scaling and growth. But then the one piece that you talked about that kind of leads well to my next question for you, Ryan, is really thinking about the role that like the economy and particularly like workforce development can play in the scaling up of urban ag and some of these sustainability practices so that folks actually, to your point, Lee, actually have a way to learn all of this stuff and rather than kind of a choose your own adventure and figure it out on your own. And so, yeah, thinking about from farm to composting and everything in between, the food system does play a huge role in can play a huge role in the green economy and does play a huge role in our local economy as a whole. And this is where this work overlaps with our economic development pillar in particular. And so we do have one particular thing that is focused on workforce development for urban ag. And I know, Ryan, you all collaborate closely with LA Conservation Corps. And so can you share a little bit more around how LA Compost engages with those folks, and then in workforce development, and how you see scaling that, how that scaling and support of some of the items in the agenda broadly around workforce development for urban ag?
Yeah, thank you. I'm happy to share. LA Compost and LA Conservation Corps are very close partners. We're really lucky to have their core members at our sites. They work directly alongside our staff at the community composting hubs, and it helps us to amplify our impact. Of course, we get more done together. So on any given site, we'll have LA Compost staff, sometimes some Conservation Corps members, and then volunteers from the community. And it's helping to really grow that movement of community composters across LA County. I guess personally, been tracking Conservation Corps as a model for a long time, and I've always appreciated it. They have very low barriers to entry, and they also have their core members working paid job training shifts. And as someone who came up in a space where it was expected that you did unpaid internships to learn, I don't know if those were the opportunities you were referring to, Lee, but the idea was to show up on your own time, on your own dime, and learn from the people who had more experience in the space. While that was generous, it is not always easy for people to achieve. And so for Conservation Corps to be able to have paid job training, to me is kind of just the right way to do this. So we're so pleased to be in partnership and providing education and instruction about how to compost during these shifts. And the crews just become part of our team. In some cases, very literally, our most recent hire was from the San Fernando Valley crew. Shout out Antonali, who works at our El Nido Farmers Market, our Dunsmore Park Hub up in Glendale, and is also part of our build team. And we want to be able to really replicate his success because our network's growing. We're at those 50 sites across LA County, but we should be at 63 by next year. And when we're doing that recruitment, we're actually looking to our core members who have been previously trained at our sites first before we do a public recruitment, because these folks really know, and it's a really strong relationship. And so we're trying to build upon that green jobs pipeline and continue to foster that. So that's our approach. We'll also take liberties to say that I feel very lucky to be a community composter. It's a job that really didn't exist a couple decades back, and we now have 35 folks on our staff. And so there's a lot of people who can say that this is what they wake up to do. We're each hired locally to serve our very own communities, and I find that to be a beautiful thing and trending in the right direction for this region. Our Good Food for All agenda is super, super ambitious and comprehensive around composting and food sovereignty. Sometimes looking at the actions, I'm like, whoa, yes, 10 years, not the 5-year goal, the 10-year goal. We have so much work to do, but it feels good to know that there's at least 35 folks who are working really hard to build that workforce and a pipeline and have those trainees who are ready to support implementation of all those really aggressive actions.
Thank you so much. And I think kind of really thinking about this pipeline for folks to come into this also plays a really important role, because we can build as much as we want, but if we aren't also thinking about how we're supporting workers and community and actually making things accessible, it loses the sustainability that we're trying to achieve in the first place. And so this is our last question of our more scheduled questions, and then we'll open it up. If you are have any questions, you can drop them in the chat, and Tonya will kind of help grab them for us for our panelists. So I think just to kind of close it out, environmental sustainability is like, I think, one of our most like wide, nebulous ranging pillars, because it touches on so many different things. And so to kind of close this out, we're hoping to kind of really ground us in some of the questions around land, because in LA, the access to land, as Lee mentioned, is like one of the like primary immediate barriers that kind of shuts off the rest of these conversations in many ways. And so one of the ways farmers are accessing land is through land use agreements and public spaces. And so they're also accessing capital via purchasing agreements with public entities. And so the ways in which our public space and public institutions play a role in creating space for these smaller community and farmer-oriented projects to really like get a foothold in the door. And so Florence, can you share kind of your approach to engaging community and local growers, both on site at LAUSD sites, but also in your institutional purchasing for the district as well?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I do want to mention that, our partnership with Garden School Foundation and Crop Swap is part of the USDA composting and food waste grant. And the other half of this is our farm to school contracts, which came out through the CDFA farm to school grants. So in the beginning, we weren't participating in grants. We thought it was just way too much work, way too much to do as far as track deliverables and stuff. But what we have realized is, you know what, it really holds you more accountable, and it forces you to really try, not just to try and figure out what the best practice is, but to actually do the work to show in metrics what's happening. So for example, with Crop Swap and Garden School Foundation, they do waste audits at these schools that are the pilot schools. So we can tell that the waste the amount of waste is being reduced. And part of that is because of the education that they're doing with the students. And then the other part about it is also our farm to school. We're just getting better products. We're getting items that are fresh from the farmers, delivered direct, taste better, in season. The kids are enjoying it and eating it more. I think part of the biggest thing that we've done is really used our farm to school grant to do two things. One, to do nutrition education, and two, to use our partners who are 5-year contracts with food hubs and partners to provide us with products that are direct, right? So we're building a better food system, and then we're getting that to the students, and we're teaching them about those fruits and vegetables so their consumption goes up, their waste goes down. One of the things that we're doing is in our climate literacy schools, up to 300 schools next year, they're going to be getting monthly what we call farmers harvest boxes. And within that box is certain items that the teacher has a lesson plan already made for them that's on their Schoolology account. They pull up the lesson plan, they go through the lesson plan, and the kids get to taste and eat this fruit. So this month I think is tasting vegetables. So there's like mini peppers in there, some snap peas, different regular kinds of peppers. Last month they got to try kumquats. So we know a whole bunch of kids tried kumquats for the very first time. But it's giving them that nutrition education, and then the thought that food has value, don't waste it. The more that we ingrain that into them, the more apt they're going to be to, one, help reduce the waste, two, understand that if I'm not going to eat it, maybe I find somebody who can or put it in the share cart. Three, if they've already taken a bite out of it, at least help us separate the food so that it then can go to the compost pile, right? And then hopefully take those lessons home, invite the community. And I think one of the best things that our community partners do is we don't just use the school for the students. They use those gardens to bring community members in and teach them as well. So we've partnered with our CTE programs, both our culinary and our ag programs. And these students are getting these culinary boxes as well and are connecting with our farmer partners. But I think one of the biggest things is we continue to try and outreach and find more and more smaller farmers, smaller growers within LA Unified and within Southern California to provide for the district. So I don't need 230,000 servings of an item, but I can go ahead and get something from a smaller farmer, especially if it's like a specialty crop, and then rotate the schools that it's going through so everybody gets an opportunity to try new things. And we realize that when we do that, our purchasing power has a big ability to change the food system. Instead of paying distributors and major processors, right? We're getting more dollar actually to the growers and to the people doing the work. So we hope to continue to do that and look at alternative ways where we can help partners, and especially we'd love to get more connected with urban ag, get them in situations where we can get into long-term agreements so they have that contract, that security to go ahead and say, look, but I'm doing business with LA Unified and they're going to be purchasing my products for 5 years or so. That's the key, right? That's the beauty with these partnerships directly with the farmers, is they have stability and long-term contracts. We're working with them now so that they can actually plant crops that our students will be consuming, which is, if you would have told me that 10 years ago, I'd have said you're nuts. And now the fact that we're giving kids organic fruit and vegetables that come directly from farmers, and the farmers are taking they're loving this, right? Because there's nothing better than feeding kids. And then our kids are benefiting from it as well. So that's a little bit of what we're kind of working on.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I think like between all of the work, like I said, it can be nebulous, and like Ryan said, it can be quite ambitious. But like you said, 10 years ago, as to what we are living in and know that is happening now also sounded crazy. So I think really thinking about how we move that work, and also like kudos to you, Florence, as well, for like being a big champion in that, because like some of that's not stuff that you necessarily like have to do to that degree. And I think particularly the point that you made around like getting some of the urban farmers and smaller farmers to the point where they can be able to be in relationship with LAUSD or even other school districts. I think, Lee, that's something that you kind of lifted up of like, there's like this gap period of a beginning farmer, even a smaller farmer, of like, how do we address some of these barriers so that more folks can get to the point where they can start to have these long-term relationships and actually have the capacity to meet the demand that we know exists locally. And I think at LA Compost, you all play a really important role of like, you're co-located at school sites, on farms, and everything in between. And I think are like embedded across the community in a way too. So thank you all so much for showcasing that. I think out of all of them we've done, so environmental sustainability is the one that has so many different arms, and you can deep dive into so many different areas. And I appreciate like the work that you all are doing. And so I hope everyone who's been listening, I know there might be some questions in the chat. Tonya has been messaging me them, so I will start with one question, and then again, keep putting them in the chat and we'll track them as well. So we'll transition to that. And so I think, okay, there's two questions. One is more so for Ryan, and then the second one is more so Florence. For Ryan, I think, we're focused on LA, but we know there's global things happening across the world and supply chain disruptions due to that. And so I think there's a question around if U.S. farmers might pivot more. What do you think is stopping U.S. farmers from pivoting to compost, and what could move them to do so? So really, maybe I'll make it even more specific to LA, of what do you think is stopping some of the particular LA SoCal farmers from pivoting to compost, and what could move them to do so?
It's a great question. I had a really great opportunity to go up to Sacramento to the U.S. Composting Council conference in February. And it was a great mix of community composters, which kind of skew urban or a little bit younger, and some more established farmers. And we were able to share information and resources. So in that venue, we talked about just this. And it's similar to what Lee was saying. It's hard to know unless you're in exactly that space as a farmer, what the prerequisites are to you having successful business relationships with a lot of people that you are required to work with. And so what the farmers were reporting is that they know there's a direct connection between the way that we engage in war systematically over many years in this country and the way that chemical fertilizers are developed and sold to farmers. And so they see that connection. Lots of people have families that remember the times before when manure was a central component in creating fertilizers on site, and everyone was really more qualified and skillful at composting to be able to grow more food. And they are trying to get back there. There's a few things in the way, and typically they're larger contracts that they have if they're buying seeds from some folks, or some of the public health regulations also in certain states have evolved to kind of become accustomed to chemical fertilizers. And so if they were to say, yes, we're using manure and all of the vegetative waste that's generated on site to compost, there are some hangups. Some people might say, I'm not sure we can contract with you, or some public health officials might scratch their head because it's now seen as a little bit different, whereas historically we've done that for longer than we've used the chemical inputs. So it's a work in progress. And let me tell you, when we all got together, there was no room between us. It was a really unifying experience to understand that people from all walks could kind of work together in the same direction. So I don't think it'll be too long before we get back to that.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that in particular. So the second question, combining a couple of the questions that came into the chat. The first one, Florence, is just like, the first question is, does LAUSD have gardens at the schools? And then the follow-up to that is, how do we connect with LAUSD about collaborating with schools interested in starting a school garden?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, those are a great question. And hopefully, I don't know when the grant's going to come back, but hopefully soon we'll have an even better to that answer right now. Right now, there is no centralized office that oversees or helps and supports school gardens. It is the individual schools themselves, which kind of makes it very difficult because it lends it to them relying on parent volunteers or so, or maybe one teacher is like the champion and then that teacher retires or leaves. So you see a lot of gear up, get ready, go. And then, a few years later, it seems like the garden's no longer in use or they're trying to restart it. But we do have a grant out right now in conjunction with Garden School Foundation. We now have a centralized grant office in the district, which we didn't have until 6 months ago either. But now we have a centralized grant process between our Office of Environmental Sustainability and our goal of green spaces and converting blacktops and things into green spaces and now converting those into edible spaces. There's a grant that we're hoping to get to not only help Garden School Foundation expand the number of schools and gardens, but then also to create the centralized office that would support any school that wants to start a garden. So hopefully I'll have some news soon of how we can do that a lot better, because we want schools to basically be able to take best practices from Garden School Foundation and others to go in and create a successful garden that's going to be there for generations, not just for a certain principal or certain teacher. I did want to say in our farm to school partners, this is the first year of that. From August till now, we've spent $5 million directly to farmers for our farm to school program. And part of their job is to bring other smaller farmers and partners on and to help them meet the requirements in order to do that. So that does really help. So hopefully we'll have more information on how you can get involved and partner with school gardens, because that's our goal. We want every school to have a school garden out there. We only have about 20 schools that have ag programs, high school, middle school, high school. We would hope, especially with California being so dependent on ag, and they're good jobs too, to be able to expand that. But it's one of the things that, a lot of times they're trying to push college ready, and everybody sees college ready as it has to be technical rather than some other fields. And ag is technical too, but it's just not highlighted enough to get the support for those programs. So we'd love to have the ability to have schools in every garden for kids to see how food grows and to be connected to it, and then see that there's career paths into that as well.
Wonderful. Thank you. And yeah, and fingers crossed on the grants and things coming back. I'll add a note on that, but I'll use it in my closeout for it as well. And like the ways in which we're hyper local focused, but our food system is deeply impacted by global and federal shifts and changes, and how we are in real time adjusting to it. So we have two questions I see are the last questions that I think we'll have time for, but please still send them in. If there's a specific answer we can provide it later, we will. So for Lee, the question, it seems like regenerative agriculture has had fast growing awareness, but maybe slower practical adoption. Are there any strategies in the short run that regenerative agricultural programs can implement to both support farmers and biodiverse practices while also supporting food insecurity across the county?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And it's something that I'm thinking a lot about in my new role as like a researcher, and how do we create more linkages between like, for example, like, can we start piloting more crops on farms, or like paying farmers to grow varieties that we know have like a connection to like certain communities that like want that food. And so I think creating those relationships is one way, and or supporting the creation of those relationships is one way. And even just like starting small, I feel like is the best the best way to do things. But also I'm thinking about back to this just like seed saving and like with our gardening networks and like the resources that we have like within the city and the county, can we put more funding towards like seed libraries? Can we put more funding towards creating workshops that help people, be able to save seeds themselves, or just really any ways that we can like even incrementally expand this like the practices of regenerative agriculture, which biodiversity is one of them. But yeah, I think on the other end of it, if you're talking to producers, showing that there is like a desire for um, produce and food that is grown regeneratively, which I feel like that is also like a harder thing to do in some ways. Like we have organic, but regenerative is like something else, or it's a little bit different in my opinion. So yeah, unless we have kind of more incentives or even like policy support at like a countywide level for that type of produce specifically, I think it's going to be challenging, but hopefully we can start small.
Yeah. Yeah, and I know it's come up before where like particular, like stuff like bitter melon and things like that are like really particular needs that how do we uplift them? And so just our very last question before I wrap us up, thank you all for staying on with us, is for Ryan, which I think does really kind of curtail with this idea of how does policy change shift and maybe create space for certain things. Is how has the ramping up of SB 1383 affected the work of LA Compost? Cause problems, solve problems, change the way it works, or anything in between?
Oh, thank you for this great question. We have so many friends now here in this arena. 1383 has really raised awareness around composting. And for a lot of folks who are very busy otherwise, who work in local governments, they never really had time to invest and understand more about what we were trying to achieve. But with 1383, we've got the state of California inviting them to understand very, very quickly. And so we have a lot of fast friends. We're now operating in a lot more municipalities than we were operating in previously. And folks really understand that if there's not a strong connection to the process of composting, if people can't see it up close, they're not going to want to use that curbside green bin. And so the idea is to have people out at our sites to really get involved at a local level and understand what's possible. And then we hope that they're long-term curbside green bin users so that we can increase the diversion rate that we need to achieve our climate goals here in California. I will say that the state is super supportive. The director of Cal Recycle, Zoe Heller, was here just yesterday touring our sites here in Northeast LA, and they are 100% behind us. So as they're going out and doing compliance visits with cities, they're encouraging this model of prioritizing people, prioritizing neighborhoods, and prioritizing increasing soil health locally to grow more food. And they are kind of inviting cities to come along with them. So I think it's going to be great for the movement at large, and we're going to have a lot more people understanding what composting is and how it can benefit their communities moving forward.
Thank you. Yeah, and that's really awesome to hear. And I think for LA Food Policy Council, when we really think about kind of the intersection of programs and innovation and policy and coalitions, I think that is a really perfect example of like, we have all the folks, LA Compost moving innovative programs, other folks moving innovative programs, but having the policy that sets the stage for that work to scale much faster than you having to go to each person individually and figure out that relationship. And so I think that is a perfect way to kind of close us out today. I do want to say, I'll launch a quick poll as I wrap stuff up, just kind of just thinking about where are you doing aligned work? Where are you at for temperature check for collaboration? Maybe you're at a 0 because you're I actually don't work in this space at all, but I love it. That's okay. Maybe you're at a 10 because you're I'm already working with these folks. And I hope you guys got to see there's a lot of ambitious goals set for the Good Food for All agenda, particularly for environmental sustainability, but hopefully the panel we saw today really showcased the ways in which that those ambitious goals will be achieved collectively. And if LA Compost is successful and Cultural Roots Nursery and UCANR and LAUSD are all able to achieve their goals, collectively we'll all be in a much better place along with everyone else on this call and you being able to achieve your goals. And so I think everyone has a role to play and a place to fit in. If you're interested in getting like down and dirty about some of the policy goals and really like working on policy advocacy and coalition, you can join us at our Urban Ag Working Group. That is in the process actually of like reconvening and identifying policy priorities moving forward based on the agenda. You can also join us with our Institutional Food Waste Working Group that is focused on supporting institutions implementing SB 1383. As we talked about that a lot. The policy exists, but the implementing it on the ground, there's things to support folks and how do we make sure it's community informed. You also can go out and support LA Compost. They have an event, Compost Day, this Saturday, and all the links will, of course, send out for folks to continue to be engaged and support the work of LAUSD and their partners, Garden School Foundation and Crop Swap, UCANR, Cultural Roots Nursery. So there's a lot of ways to get involved, and we hope you continue to do so. This is our last webinar for the agenda launch and kickoff. You'll be hearing us talk about the agenda so much more for the next 5 to 10 years. And the goal is for this to make sure that we're driving this work, we're tracking it, and we're moving forward. And just to kind of really wrap us up and close this out is thinking about there's questions around the way that tariffs and war and federal government really plays a role in some of this work. And so I think how we move together is really important, and how we create a stronger local regional food system that is sustainable is in many ways how we create resilience regardless and despite of what's happening at a global level. So thank you all for joining us for all of our pillars. I've seen some names on all 4, so thank you for spending the last month of Wednesdays with us. Shout out to our partners who's joined us throughout all of it. LA Compost, UCANR, LAUSD today. Last week we heard from SJLI, Hollywood Food Coalition, Hollywood Food Coalition, and Bila Network. The week before, we heard from the UCLA Labor Center, Inclusive Action for the City, and Crenshaw Food Hub. That's just a snippet of the 200 plus orgs that create our network for the LA Food Policy Council. Thank you so much, and stay in touch, get involved, and we'll move this work together.